research you can find about, you know, what's the real impact of this voting system as compared to that voting system. And he divided voting systems up into majoritarian and consensual. The majoritarian are the winner-take-all systems, and the consensuals are the proportional representation systems. Because what he determined from his analysis was that when you have a majoritarian model, this concentrates political power in the hands of a bare majority or a smaller plurality. And the resulting political system will tend to be exclusive, competitive, and adversarial. Is that sound familiar? Democratic institutions in the consensus model force broader participation in government and broader agreement on government policies. These political systems tend to be characterized by inclusiveness, bargaining, and compromise. The principle, as long as you enforce rigid party discipline, nothing bad can happen. So we can do whatever we want, and we're the winners and you're the losers, and too bad for you. So that's the style of government you get. That's the style of politics you get. If you have a situation, and we see that carry over even into a situation where we have a minority, they still behave the same because the rules are the same, and they know that, you know, if they have an election in a month, it's highly likely that somebody will get a majority government, and they don't want to be seen. It's a crime to cooperate under our current system. You seem to be making deals with some other political party. Well, that's terrible. Whereas, you know, when you have a proportional voting system, well, it's just taken for granted. Nobody's going to get a majority government. You've got to sit down, talk to each other, and figure out the things you can agree on, and come to some sort of consensus on how we're going to run the country. And that means, you know, you have to be a little more civilized in your politics, because you can't be screaming, flaming over these guys this week when you know next week you might have to, you know, make a deal with them. So he analyzed what's the impact of the voting system along a number of dimensions. For one thing, he talked about government-voter proximity. You may have noticed that the governments in Canada tend to be out of sync with the people. People think this, the government thinks that. How can that possibly happen? So he used a couple of different measures to a series of nations. He set up a scale, 10 points from left to right, and he analyzed the difference between where the government sat and where the people sat. And you know, the closer they are together, the better. What he found is that in the consensus democracies, this distance is smaller. The people and the government are closer together in how they feel about things. Satisfaction with democracy. Polls are taken. How do you feel about the government? There was an international study in 1995-96 that measured citizen satisfaction with the way democracy works in your countries. What he found is that citizens in consensus democracies are significantly more satisfied with democratic performance in their countries than citizens in majoritarian democracies. The difference is nearly 17 percentage points. He points to another study that measured the differences in satisfaction between citizens who voted for the winning party versus those who supported the losers. Obviously, the people who voted for the winners are going to be happier than the people who voted for the losers. But how big is the difference? And what he found that in the difference in satisfaction is more than 16 percentage points smaller under a consensus type of system than in a typical majoritarian democracy. Voter turnout. Again, there's a lot of different factors that affect voter turnout. You know, the weather's one of them. And is there a charismatic candidate? Is there a hot issue? On any given day, any one of those is probably more important than the voting system. But in general and on average and in the long run, what they found is that the proportional voting systems tend to give you maybe a 7 or 8 point boost in voter turnout. Political equality. Leipart states that political equality is a basic goal of democracy, and the degree of political equality is therefore an important indicator of democratic quality. How do you measure political equality? Well, he used economic equality as an indicator. that people who are politically disadvantaged are going to end up being economically disadvantaged. That's something you can argue about, but surely we can all agree that lower levels of economic disparity are better. So what he concluded, consensus democracy is strongly related to lower levels of economic disparity. Women in parliaments. Percentage of women in parliament is strongly and significantly related to the degree of consensus democracy. Percentage of women's parliamentary representation is 6.7 percentage points higher in consensus democracies than in majoritarian systems. The number of parties. What we see in the United States, and it's here too, although it's less obvious, you get these two major parties, and they tend to be Tweedledum and Tweedledee. You vote for this one, you get that. You vote for the other one, you get the same thing. And there are people right now who are saying, what's the difference? Even with Obama in office, you've still got the Democrats or the Republicans, and you know, we got a president we like, but he's still sending more troops out there, and he's giving money to the banks, and he's not closing Guantanamo, and he hasn't given us any health care yet. So, what's the difference? With a few more parties, you get more choice. Now, how many parties do you want? There are people saying we have proportional representation. We're going to end up with 20 small parties. Well, we actually have 20 small parties, but they don't get elected. What we find is that instead of having 2 effective parties, or 2.3 effective parties as we have now, you're going to end up with 4 or 5 effective parties. So you're getting more choice. But, and as I say, the devil's in the details. You can tweak the system, set your thresholds, this and that, to, right now they're having a discussion in Israel. Israel is like the most proportional system in the world. There's almost no threshold. The entire country is one big riding, and they're tied up in knots with these small parties. On the other hand, Holland has almost identical voting system, and they don't have that problem. So obviously the voting system doesn't explain everything. But in Israel, they're talking about, well, maybe we should go towards a mixed system. There are other places where they have single-member ridings, and they're talking about let's go into a mixed system. So there tends to be a bit of a convergence. So policy effectiveness. Do you get better with economy with a majoritarian system or a proportional system? Studies show successful macroeconomic management requires not so much a strong hand as a steady one. PR and coalition governments are better able to provide steady, centrist policy making. On balance, consensus democracies have a better performance record than majoritarian democracies, especially with regard to the control of inflation, but also with regard to most of the other macroeconomic performance variables. It's not a huge difference. You can't clearly say that you're going to get a better economy with a proportional voting system, but what's clear is there's no reason to believe that you'll get a worse one. What about environmental policy? Leipart found 2 studies that offer reasonably defensible assessments of environmental policy performance. One actually measured carbon dioxide emissions, fertilizer consumption, and deforestation. On a 0 to 100 scale, consensus democracy scored 10 points higher. You get less carbon dioxide with proportional representation. Statistically significant at the 10% level, whatever that means. Energy efficiency. Leipart used the World Bank's figures for GDP divided by total energy consumption for the years 1990-94. Correlation between consensus democracy and energy efficiency is extremely strong, significant at the 1% level, unaffected by the introduction of level of development as a control variable. With the right voting system, you use less energy. So, conclusions. Leipart believes his work has an extremely important practical implication. The overall performance record of the consensus democracies is clear.